All right, good morning, everybody. Hagara Wayak. Nini Nian Fawn Douglas, Nick Nuwuvi. Hello, everybody. How are you? Thank you. My name is Fawn. I'm a member of the Las Vegas Paiute tribe. I also have roots in the Wapa Paiute, Muskogee Creek, Southern Cheyenne, and Pawnee nations. I am a student in the MFA program here at UNLV and a curator for this exhibition and symposium. I wanted to welcome you in my language and be able to take a breath too. I'm just really realizing, as I have been this past couple months, the enormity of this event and what it means for our people, and to be a Paiute woman on Paiute land doing Paiute things. And it just tickles me. So from my heart, I welcome you, and wanted to also say a few words about the exhibition and what's happening and taking place today. We're going to have a number of artists that are speaking about their work that is presented in the AH WAH-NEE exhibition at the Donna Beam Gallery. And these artists were chosen. There's 10 of us that were chosen, to present our work. And these are all women that I very much have looked up to and, have wanted to be like and have grown up with as well. From Roxanne Swensel to Rose B. Simpson, Cara Romero, and all of the different artists that are here today. So we're going to have two panels that are happening. And first and foremost, I wanted to thank our partners because there was so much support for this. The UNLV College of Fine Arts, the Marjorie Barrick Museum of Art, the Paul Harris Theater, the Native American Alumni Club, the Minority Serving Institutions Student Council, the American Indian Alliance, the Department of History, the Department of Anthropology, the Interdisciplinary Gender and Ethnic Studies, the Cosmopolitan Hotel Las Vegas, Nevada Museum of Art, Nevada Indian Commission, the Las Vegas Paiute Tribe, the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, the Southern Nevada Conservancy, Black Mountain Institute, Meow Wolf, Desert Arts Action Coalition, Nevada State Assembly member Howard Watts, and WESTAF, the Western States Arts Federation, and countless others that showed up to support and volunteer and take part in this. But for now, I would like to introduce our former chairwoman and current councilwoman, Alfreda Mitre from the Las Vegas Paiute Tribe, to deliver our welcome today. Thank you.
Good morning. How is everyone today? Good? I see some heads nodding out there. It's good. Like Fawn said, my name is Alfreda Mitre. I'm the former chairman from the Las Vegas Paiute Tribe. I want to welcome you to the Southern Paiute land. We are the Ida Nuwu, which means that we are from the land. We are made of Dweep, which is earth, and Ba, which is water. Water is sacred to us. And it seems kind of contrary since we are owners of golf courses and we use tons of water. So I'm going to get into that a little bit, but I want to tell you about a little bit about the land, the history that we are standing on right now. The original Southern Paiute people occupied land from their Aboriginal homeland, stretched from southern Nevada, southern California, southern Nevada, southern Arizona, and southern Utah. That was our homeland. That was Southern Paiute Nation. We are made up of 5 bands: the Las Vegas Paiute Tribe, the Moapa Band, the Southern Paiute Tribes of Utah and Kaibab, and our most southern tribe, the San Juan Paiutes. So that is the Southern Paiute Nation. By 1910, we had lost most of our land and we were combined to 10 acres of land. That 10 acres was deeded to us by the largest single landowner in the valley, also one of the first female entrepreneurs of the valley, Helen J Stewart. And when Helen J Stewart deeded that land to our great-great-grandmother, she did it not because of the generosity of her heart, although that might have been a part of it, but the largest part of it was to protect her labor force. And that was us. We were part of that labor force. And it is through her determination that the Las Vegas Paiute tribe exists still in the valley today. We are the only southern Paiute tribe in the Las Vegas Valley. We have Moapa to the north, but we are a small band. And originally it was called the Las Vegas Colony. Well, you know about colonization, and that's why it's called colony. It was through our great-great-grandmother's determination to keep her family intact as long as she could and to occupy that land. And we became the evidence of what was originally here. This was our home. And the thing that testifies and is testimony to that is all the landmarks that are in the valley, which our golf courses are named after. We have Tavakai, which is a spring mountain, and we have Nuwuvi, which is a snow mountain. And when we started with the 10 acres of land, it was to maintain the remnants of what was. And then it was in about 1915 that all of her children, all of our great-grandmother's children, were taken off to boarding school. And one day she was a mother, and the next day she had no children. And they went off to school. Of course, you know what happens in boarding schools back then, under the Department of War. Our languages were almost erased. That was the second assault. The first assault was taking of the land. The second assault was taking the language and taking the future. So they thought. And so with that 10 acres of land, we carved out a living. We carved out a way of surviving in the valley. We adapted to what was around us. The city grew up around us. We didn't receive running water or electricity until the 60s. And then in 1971, we ratified our tribal constitution. And of course, it's those constitutions that are modeled after the Knights of Columbus. So you have all of these canned constitutions throughout the United States, and ours is one of them. And in that constitution, it allows us to build businesses, to collect excise tax. So we opened up a smoke shop. With our first $1 million, we bought 2 acres of land back on Main Street. And with that land, we began to make a lot of money. And then in 1983, we bought back 4,000 more acres of our land. It's a little bit less than 4,000. I like to round it up. But we bought back 4,000 acres of our land. They say it was a land trade. We spent millions of dollars in lobbyists, political contributions, everything that you do when you're negotiating with the tribal government, with the United States government. So we got our land back. And of course, one of the unique things that happens in Indian country, and it's just not unique to the Las Vegas Paiute tribe, but tribes in general. And of course, our trustee, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, failed in its trust responsibility. And so when we acquired the land, there was no running water, there was no access, no permanent water, and there was no rights of way. Although within the bill, which gives us back our land, it says for economic development. What can you build with no water and no access? So we had this big long dispute with the government. We sued them. They joined forces with us, and we were able to get rights of way, so permanent access to our land. And then we started what was the biggest fight that we had, the biggest challenge, and that was for our water rights. And in the beginning of my welcome today, I talked about how water is sacred. We're 85% water. If you think about it, when you feel bad, you take a shower, you get in water. When you're sick, everybody says drink water. In our tribe, when you have a bad dream, you wake up and you say pa, you say water. So when we were fighting for our water rights, we had to quantify and prove consumptive use using the formula by the United States government to prove consumptive use and to quantify. Why? Because Indians cannot bank water. So we thought about what takes a huge amount of water, 1,000 acre feet of water. Golf courses, we have 3 of them. Why? Because we have to prove consumptive use. We have to use this water in order to preserve it into the future. That negotiation with our tribal people, our tribal leaders at the time, some of the grandmothers of the people who are in the audience today, and by the way, I failed in my responsibility as an elder. I forgot to introduce some of our council people here. We have a young vice chairwoman back here, Darren Peak. You want to stand up and say hello? She's one of our youngest members. And then we have Ila Yazi over here, who is also a council member. So it's their grandmothers, Fawn's grandmother, my grandmother. We're all alive at the time, and we're telling them we're going to build a golf course, and we're going to take this pure, pristine water, and we're going to throw it into the air, and we're going to grow all this grass so people can go out there and recreate. Knowing that more people in the world die from the lack of clean water than any war or any disease. We're going to do this because we have to. We have to take this formula and we have to use our most precious resource in order to protect it into the future. And that was very, very troubling. And we were able to do that. In the process, we were able to build a wonderful championship golf course that's given the tribe great notoriety, but there's great pain behind it as well. Same thing with the smoke shop. When we bought back our land, it was because we could collect the excise tax in order to fund our tribal government. And when we collect the excise tax, and we do the same for Nuwuvi, those taxes that we collect go to fund our police department. They go to fund some of our clinic. They fund our courts. They fund our daycare. So we truly are funding a tribal government. And this happens through a lot of the tribes throughout the United States. When we're running a tribal government, we are running a whole community without the various departments that you see in a city or you see in the county. There aren't all those. You have a tribal council and you have directors of all of these departments, but yet we're functioning as a large city. We're a people who have come a long way. And I tell you this story not because I'm boastful in any way, but to let you know that there is a community of people here, although we may not be fluent in our languages, because we didn't have that opportunity, we're the 3rd generation. There's a people here that don't live the same way that we were once allowed to live or that was inherent to us. But we are a people who know the land, and no one knows it better than us. There are landmarks here. There are landmarks here that are going to be here forever. There are the mountains. There's the smell of the rain, of the earth after it rains. There is that breeze that comes through that reminds you that it is the song. It is the song of our ancestors. And when you're walking out there in the desert, you can feel it. You almost want to take off your shoes and walk in the sand. You want to walk on a place that knows you and that knows your ancestors. We didn't come from someplace else. This was our home. This was our land. People lived here. They camped here. It was a trade zone. It was people, tribes from all over came through this area. And then my grandmother once said, the desert was created by the Creator so that he could have a place to dream. And that's what I see when I'm out in the desert. When you get away from the lights here, you can see and you can feel. And you know that this was once a great, important place, that there were thousands and thousands of people that came there, and not the mere 55 tribal adult members of the Las Vegas Paiute tribe. There was a culture that was rich. And when we think about art, and we think about the connection to creation, to create, to be able to project your inner thoughts, whether it's in baskets, or whether it's in acrylic, or whatever media it's in. It's that ability to connect your subconscious with the reality that's out here, to show that inner part of your soul, to show and to share that, and to have the confidence to do that, and to know that it's going to be appreciated, and that's your talent. That's who you are meant to be. The Creator gave us life. What we do with our life is the gift we give to the Creator. And that's important. With that said, I'd like to, again, welcome you to our homeland. And thank you for being respectful and listening, and for allowing me this opportunity to share just that tiny bit of history to tell you who we are as a people. Sometimes when we introduce ourselves, we say, I'm an artist, I'm a basket maker, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a professor, I'm a, whatever it is we do. Those are things we do, but who are we? Who are we? We are people of this land, and I always tell my young colleagues, don't forget that. We are speaking not for just right now. We're speaking for those in the past, and we're speaking for those in the future. And that is real important. And you and everyone who's here has a talent that can be shared in many, many different ways. And sometimes we don't know what those are right now. But there will be a time when it will reveal itself. And you'll be allowed to have that opportunity, whether it's on a big scale like this, or it's in a small setting, where you're talking to a child, or you're talking to an elder, or you're talking to your classmate. Whatever that is, it's going to be important. Because everyone here, we're put here for a purpose. And in this valley, that's what we exist for. I thank you for your indulgence, and Ha'ayak, it is good.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Alfreda Mitre, and thank you all. I would also like to introduce Dr. Erika Abad. Dr. Erika Abad is going to be moderating the panel discussion today with our three artists that are here. Today we have Cara Romero, Loretta Burden, and Noelle Garcia, three amazing Great Basin artists. Dr. Erika Abad has been a mentor and an amazing presence here at UNLV. She is in the Interdisciplinary Gender and Ethnic Studies Department, and she is currently teaching critical race feminist theory, as well as many other classes. And now I'd like Erika to come up, because I'd love to get to this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that introduction, Fawn. And I know I'm here because there are no Indigenous full-time faculty feminists who teach feminist theory from an Indigenous perspective on this campus. And I want to acknowledge that. Okay, so last night over dinner, I was sitting between Noelle, among other artists, and I was reminded of why I teach because I can tell the stories my foremothers couldn't. And when I went to the exhibit yesterday, I was reminded that artists are storytellers. And so with that in mind, I want to first ask the artists to discuss their creative process in terms of what comes first, the medium or the story, and what relationship do you see between them?
I think for me, the story comes first. A lot of my artwork is just expressing memories or stories, or even trying to dissect them and coming to terms with them. I look at the process of art making kind of as a moment or a state where I get to spend time with a loved one, where I get to spend time with a memory, and just really kind of get in there. Before I even start making the artwork, there's a lot of things involved, like reviewing images, seeing if I can research any facts that correlate with the memory, and then a lot of writing, sometimes weird poetry that's not so great, which is why I don't share it. But anyhow, that's kind of how things take shape for me. I think over the years, because I'm telling such personal and private stories, I've tried to pay more care with making sure that the objects and artworks I make are accessible and something that other people can empathize with, so that it's not all about me, right? Because it's just like this constant dance of like looking in really close at myself and then stepping back and looking at the larger picture and seeing where we all kind of fit in together.
Okay, so I'm Loretta. I never knew I was an artist, but here I am. But I had to move to Fallon several years ago because I had adopted my great niece and I was already over 50. And I wanted her, because we lived here in Vegas, and then I wanted her to know who her family was, because she didn't know her brothers or, you know, her aunts or uncles. So I made this decision to move back home, and I thought, well, she'll learn who her family is, but I didn't know who I was, and I thought I was going to go sit in the rocking chair and just stay in the house and not do anything. And then I started hearing about a class that somebody was teaching of traditional baskets, and so I decided I would try my hand at it. And I started adding color to my baskets just because of Mother Earth, and I would see all these colors, and I thought, well, I'm traditional, but yet I'm contemporary. And so people would kind of look at my work and say, well, that's not traditional. And I was like, but I started it traditionally. But to do traditional baskets is a lot of work because you have to go out and collect certain times of the year. You have to know what, you know, all the new shoots that you're looking for, and then you got to debark it. And I was lucky because these missionaries would, my mask went down. The missionaries would come around and say, what can we do for you? And I was like, oh, can you guys use a knife? Because you can help me debark the willows. And so that's what they did. I was shocked that somebody would actually enjoy helping me to work up the willows. So it's a lot of work. It really is, but once I'm done, I actually like my work. But anyway, so I don't have much of a story. Anyway, I was so happy I moved back home and got to learn some of my culture.
Cara Romero, Alfreda, for that beautiful welcome and introduction. I'm from Nuwuvi Valley and I'm a contemporary fine art photographer. When I started out in photography, it was black and white film, and it was at a time that I was going to school for cultural anthropology. And I knew that I wanted to tell the story of modern Native peoples because everything that was taught in schools was taught as historic and bygone. And I knew from living in the city at that point that people outside of the reservation and outside of our cultures really had no understanding of us. And I knew that that was directly related to an erasure in school and education. And I stumbled into a photography class in 1997 and fell in love with the medium. To get to your question, I fell in love with the medium of photography, and I kind of knew instantly that this is somehow going to be my way to tell our story, to tell the story of my community, to tell the story of the pain and the beauty that I knew. And so it was also took away the great heaviness of having to write about it or maybe go through the academic avenue, because I wasn't really a scholar or a writer. So I feel like photography kind of came to me at a time. And with a photograph, it really is true, that adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so I took to the medium and knew that a picture was worth 1,000 words. And I had an instructor that changed my life that was really emphasized content over technical ability. And the more that I could layer into one single photograph, the more I could tell a story. And as I honed in on this idea of making sure that there's really layered content and good collaborative story in the photographs, the artistic process is really kind of like this magical realm of like holding space maybe for something that wants to make itself. And I think that that's really important as artists. We can come with our stories and with our soul and with our spirit and with the spirit of the people that we work with, but at the end we're really just holding space for the story that wants to make itself known. And I think that it's a careful craft, and you have to be really loving to your community and really loving to yourself, and that's my answer to that question.
Thank you. As I'm reflecting on your answers and looking at my questions, I'm thinking about how, right, in higher ed, some perceived quarantine as an opportunity to quote, produce more. But research shows, right, that those who produce tend to be those who are not responsible for people. So with that in mind, how has quarantine affected or informed your creative process? Quarantine and the pandemic, to be more precise.
I think when COVID started happening and quarantine started happening, initially my thoughts were focused on elders. So I didn't get an opportunity to grow up on my reservation or with my community. I grew up with another community, which I really loved. But I started realizing, I feel like kind of late in life, how important it was to access elders as a resource and consult them for important cultural knowledge. So when the pandemic started happening, it was really terrifying. The idea of elders being especially susceptible to this disease. And it was very scary, very jarring. And I wonder if many other Native American people have had that panic or that fear when it started happening. As you referenced, though, I am a mother, so I'm the primary caregiver at home, so it was often just really hard to physically make things, but my thoughts were making things in themselves, which I do think it's very nice. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got from art school was just to always have a sketchbook and be using it to record things, whether it's drawings, sketches, or just writings. So, during these times where you can't physically make something, just you make other things, right, with your thoughts, or you're planning making things. Yeah, it's a very brief answer, but I think it's also, I enjoy painting and drawing. It's really, I think, my love. But when you have small children, bead weaving is really nice, just because it's just like this really easy, portable thing you can do. I did get a lot of bead work done during the pandemic.
Well, because I'm older, and I kind of welcomed it because that meant I really had to stay home and work on my projects. And I had way too many projects, so. Yeah, so to me, I actually welcomed it, and it made me work longer on my projects than I would normally work. So if I got up at 5 in the morning, I'd start working on something. And because before that, people were always asking me to help them, to teach them, to go out and collect for them. So this kind of gave me a break. And I mean, and I didn't have a lot of company anyway, so, you know, everybody was locked up. But, yeah, no, I thought it was something that I could get my projects done on and try to see how much I could get done. So.
I've probably struggled more than these two because I depend on people for my art and work in communities, sometimes with large groups. And I think also as women and as mothers, we're always trying to find a balance between being an artist and working at that self-care and keeping our hearts and our spirits alive. And then we also sacrifice everything for our children and for our families. So I think truly the beginning of the pandemic was about, you know, caring for my children and my family and their like psychological well-being. And then, you know, as Native peoples, we're not strangers to pandemic. So I think there was a lot of remembering that these were small sacrifices, that if we could survive this, that maybe we'd be better off than when tuberculosis came through here and we lost so many people, or smallpox or the Spanish flu. And so I would tell my children all of those stories. And as at a point by fall of 2020, I also get this like feeling inside where I don't know, it's a hunger or it's a drive where, you know, you have to make something. And I love about art that there's so much problem solving involved. Like it's often like breakdown, or you get stopped, or you don't know what to do, and then you're thinking about it and an idea comes to you. And I think also as Native women, we're very resourceful because we often grew up with very little and know how to do so much with so little, that I kind of, my solution in looking for answers was really, you know, you've taken your art to this space where you're working with groups of people, but what if you come back to your family and to your landscape? And so the work that I made during quarantine was all with, you know, safely distanced with individuals that are very close to me, that I was able to, you know, use a longer lens so you can, you know, keep distance, but they're also really intimate of the person and the landscape. And that was my problem solving for how I would be able to make work during the pandemic. And that's still where I'm at, you know, because we're not through this yet. So.
No, we're not. Thank you. I think of the pandemic, and in terms of my own creative process, my grandmother returned to the earth days before it became global. So I think about this and what it means to go back home, whether home to where my mother currently lives, or having gone back home, and seeing it affected by colonialism indirectly via the earthquakes and the response. Puerto Rico, by the way. Thinking about this, what does it mean, right? Each of you draw so much from home, and place for different reasons has been important. And in this age of funding and residencies, what does it mean when residencies require you to leave home for your work and for your commitment to your community? And what recommendations would you have for folks who are thinking about how to honor Indigenous artists and their responsibilities to their people?
A lot of questions within there. I'm a bit of a nomad. You know, I was raised when I was younger at the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. My reservation is Klamath up in southern Oregon. Because I wasn't raised there, the relationships I have there are still being nurtured, I think. And some of the relationships I have are older individuals, and not so many younger people. I think I'm just going to start talking about my relationship with that land, but like, that land is like this weird mixture of foreign, yet very familiar. Like when I go there, I think the first time I remember seeing the marshes, it was very striking, like I could feel it, that I had somehow been there before. But when I go into the areas where there's higher trees, there's this sensation of dread that overcomes me, and I'm not quite sure why. Maybe having to do with my family's treatment on that land and how traumatic and violent it was. So, and then the community I was raised in, I'm not like technically enrolled, so it's kind of weird to go back to, you know, Reno and be like, hey everybody, I'm like Klamath, but not Paiute really. I mean, well, not Northern Nevada Paiute, right? So, and now I live in Chicago, so I'm just kind of like this nomad, and I started thinking about it, and I think, well, my home is my family, and they may be at different places, but at least my children are always with me right now. So, and then when it comes to residencies, I do tend to see a lot of residencies that don't allow children to come with you, and I've seen and spoken with many artists that find that problematic, and I do agree it's problematic. It definitely limits the type of people you're exposed to when you go to residencies, if you're not being able to speak with other parents, and a lot of the time that ends up being women because they tend to be the primary caregivers. However, I'm very fortunate to have a very reliable partner, my husband, who is able to help me with that. I also have a bit of a knack for being able to apply for outside funding so that I can help supplement with childcare. I do personally sometimes kind of like it when residencies don't allow kids because I say, husband, I really need to do this for my career. It's very important. I've secured funding. The kids are your responsibility for 14 days. And then I can go and I can focus and hear my own thoughts. I don't know about many other mothers, but when my kid starts talking or crying or moaning or needing something, my brain just can't focus on the art. I have to focus on fulfilling that kid's needs at that moment, so I physically need to be removed sometimes. So my advice with residencies is try to do them if you can. Be strategic, try to ask around, try to look for external funding to help you fund for childcare and things like that. And try to make sure you schedule some time to apply for them every so often because they're very good at fostering networking and personal and career growth right as well.
Well, I don't know if I can answer that question, but when I went back home, I noticed that we are losing a lot of our culture. We're losing our language. We're losing the kids. They're not interested, like in burning baskets. And but we do have some that will do beadwork. But we are still losing our kids, and we need to bring them back to where we were at one time. And so I try to encourage everybody to start teaching, and I've had to go in to teach the kids how to make baskets, and sometimes when we have a class, then I'm asked to help other people, you know, how to put theirs together. And I mean, there are times I don't even know either, but we gotta sit down and figure it out. So I think we just need to spend more time with our kids and telling them who we are.
I don't actively seek residencies because I'm a mom, and as my grandma would say, in the thick of it. They're 17, 15, and 8 years old, and it's just really hard to get away for an extended period of time. But I really liked what you said about, it kind of goes back to that idea of self-care. I think as women artists, we do have to pull ourselves away to be able to take care of our spirit. So there's a balance there of, you know, trying to be a good parent, but also trying to take care of yourself. I think I've known that, like, since I was in school, that it was kind of like this societal thing that, you know, we have so many more men artists because of what we're talking about, because, you know, as women, when we have children, that's, you know, our primary. And I think now we do have maybe some more in-home balance where we're able to get away a little bit, but I wouldn't call it like equity. You know, I wouldn't call it like we're still the primary caregivers. So I think I sit with that. One, you know, I have asked so many residencies, can I bring my children with me? And I don't know why it still kind of shocks me, but a lot of residencies, they don't allow children, and typically Native people like take their kids everywhere, you know, so it's just kind of like there's this like cultural thing where you're like, yeah, I don't think that one's for me. And then there is this idea that you do need to take some of them. So that would be my only advice. I think residencies need to make a more concerted effort towards mothers and children. We can't just leave our kids, you know, for, you know, indefinite periods of time to go make art. It would be nice. Sometimes we can do it for short periods of time. And then on the other side of that, we're pretty tethered to the school district's schedule. So it used to be like if you were taking your kid on this wonderful educational experience, you would get, you know, a reprieve from the school district. But I think the way things are set up now, for every day the child's there, the school district gets money. And so there's not these same kind of educational opportunities for kids to travel with their parents. I guess all of that to say, I'm just waiting for my kids to be older before I take these residencies. And I think a lot of mom artists, I think a lot of us are like, I mean, we see so many, you know, of our elder women artists, you know, that's really when we get to blossom, you know, is when our children are off to school. And so, anyways, the struggle is real.
Can I say something about what Loretta said? I like what you're saying, Loretta. Like, I like the idea of having a residency on your homelands. And I wish it was just a little easier to obtain funding for something like that, because if I had access to someone that could teach me how to do basket making, that was either like Northern Nevada or like Oregon or Northern California, like I would jump on it. But I don't, like the way that fundings are set up, it's like, this funding is only for Nevada. This funding is only for Oregon. This funding is only for California. This funding is only for Illinois. So like, and then, you know, I imagine it's very difficult for tribal communities to get funding for an artist to come out to work with a master basket weaver or something like that for periods of time. But I wish there was more opportunities like that, because I would be all over it, and I think it would accomplish what you're talking about, where you're bringing people home, making sure that our practices and ideals are living on, and still making sure they're being shared out with the larger community in the art world. But yeah, I mean, if someone knows something, get on it.
I've been had to learn how to make tule ducks for a show. I know nothing about that, but I was asked to work with one of the artists for an exhibit. So we did like a 2-foot tule duck. So my friend said, I want a tule duck that's 3 feet. And he said, well, what table will it fit on in the museum? So she put it down to 2 feet. So I was like, so that was an experience, just working on that and learning the technique and, you know, going out and collecting your tules and what's a tule? What's the difference between a tule and the cattail, you know? So, I mean, there's lots of things we have to work with. I just discovered triangular tules. I never even knew what those were, but they actually have 3 sides on a tule. But it's interesting. You know, you just got to get out there and learn it.
Yeah, I just keep thinking, one of the things that compelled me to get my grad degree was I wanted access to my histories, and the more I learned, the more I realized Western education is built so that we have to leave home to preserve our histories, which is why I asked my question. And that's unfortunate for a lot of reasons. And sometimes in leaving home, we can never find our way back, at least in academia. In light of that, how and where do you find joy in the process of making? And can you give us an example, like of a story?
I think these days I find a lot of joy in watching my kids learn. And it's beginning to make me rethink about my artwork as something that is an educational tool, not just art for art's sake. It's art for cultural knowledge distribution. So, like, you know, I've been fortunate enough to get some grants to go home and visit for like special events. So like a recent one I took right before the pandemic, I took my kids to the Restoration Celebration, which is a celebration and when our tribe was, our tribal rights were reinstated because we were terminated in the 1950s. So I took my son and I was just taking tons of pictures, and I remember this expression on his face while he was watching the powwow with all the horses and everyone in their regalia, and like I could see like the curiosity and just like this beautiful expression on his face of this like moment of like just learning and taking it all in. And like, you know, not only learning, not just like traditional things, he's learning like somewhat modern things, histories of our tribe, right? And just kind of like wondering how he's processing it. So you know, I painted that moment, and it was just so nice to paint his cute little face, and like just living in that moment for however many hours it took to make that artwork of just like my son like learning something and just being himself. But I think like previous to having kids, when I made artwork, it was a lot of working through really sad stories. But like now, I have this privilege of being a mother and being an educator and being able to pass on this very important knowledge and even techniques on how to research and obtain more knowledge, right? Not even just through me. And it's very exciting.
Okay, well, I get excited over new projects. I get excited if we go out and do our collecting, and so we just recently had somebody show us how to work with tules, how to make tule baskets. So that was a fun thing for me. And so I can't just do one. I have to do like 3 or 4, and then I still think they're not good enough, so I'll still keep trying. But yeah, it's exciting for me to learn new things. Somebody just started a hemp farm in Fallon, and they tried to see if we basket weavers would be interested in working with hemp. But working with it, I found the fibers too hard. They're too hard for us to work with. I mean, with the spinners, they can, you know, they can make yarn out of it. But as far as we were concerned, we weren't interested. So it's just learning new materials. Next week, we're going out, we're going to be collecting dog bane and somebody will be showing us how to make fish netting for traps or for fish. And so that's going to be a challenge for me. And where they're going is they're going where the naval base has taken over our land. And so we're officially not allowed to go out there. So I was told to be prepared to be arrested. So it's like, okay, well, who's going to take Auntie home while you guys go out and get arrested? Yeah, so it's going to be fun going out there just to collect to see if we'll get arrested or not. But that's always exciting too.
Let's see, joy in the process, right? Joy in the process. I think when I first started out in photography as a young person, there were a lot of difficult philosophical things I had to work through, or kind of existential crises, because the camera's been used as a weapon against Native people for a long time, and so I knew in my heart that I wanted to use it for this good. But how do you work through making sure you're never exploiting your community and you're never taking without giving back? And photography is such a non-traditional medium. We also grew up basket weaving. I'd love to hear you talk about it too. So to choose this medium that's so non-traditional, it was really kind of like an unsafe space is what it felt like as a young person. And I think I hear with a lot of artists and people that work in film that they just pushed on, that there was some desire to get better and this desire to maybe indigenize the medium in a good way. And that perseverance, you learn along the way how to not make mistakes of ever taking from your community or ever exploiting from your community. And after you push through and you have this highly technical skill, then all of a sudden you can be like of service to your community. And I never saw that coming, but I think for me early on there were like a lot of hardships, like can I take your photo? Sometimes people would say yes, sometimes people would say no. And now I think there's a real joy in being asked to photograph people. Like for me, it's some like high honor when mothers trust me and they ask me to photograph their daughters, or their grandmothers ask me to photograph their granddaughters. That to me is like an extreme joy. And then all the way at the other end of the process is when I work with a person and they want to take the photographs home to their family. That to me is a great joy. So when they're in grandma's house, or they want 10 copies for Christmas presents, that is a way that I give back to the person that participates, is making sure that they have accessibility to those pieces, and that those two things bring me a lot of joy.
Thank you. And picking up as sometimes our practices are either intentional or unintentional weapons, how do you find balance between what you're trying to preserve in your traditional practices and your preferred practices, and what the greater art world values?
Can you ask that one more time?
Sure. How do you find balance between the traditions you're preserving and the practices you're preserving, and the methods of creativity that you would prefer? Like, I remember, Joanne, you talking about you like drawing, and the greater demands of the art world and what the art world construes as art.
I don't know if you can necessarily say that the techniques I use are super traditional. I think they're fairly modern. Bead weaving is a modern practice, right? But like I've explained a bit of my history, it's a little complicated, so I don't have much traditional knowledge other than storytelling. And you know, I'm in the process of obtaining new old knowledge, like my language, and occasionally basket weaving techniques, which if you ever want to sign up for an apprenticeship mentorship thing, I'm really ready for it. So like when I make work, I like to think of myself as in exactly that position, a contemporary person whose generation before her was put through boarding schools forcefully and no longer has some of that information. So this is me grappling with that story. So I like to use contemporary materials and kind of reference or poke at traditional method making, or what we associate or what we assume is traditional. Like I do really love painting and drawing, which I don't know. I think that the way I like painting and drawing is maybe kind of Eurocentric. But what's funny when I do show work, I think when people get excited about my artwork, it tends to almost always be about the soft sculptures, which I make strategically as something that references traditional indigenousness, which is not correct, right? It's what Americans assume are traditional indigenousness, like bead weaving. And I kind of try to make objects that kind of poke fun at it a little bit. So, like I hope when people look at my work, they're like, oh, that's so beautiful and shiny, like jewelry, and it's so Indian. But at the same time, I'm like making fun of us all and our incorrect perceptions of what indigenous art is. And it's funny that work tends to get more noticed. And they get a kick out of it, so.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I still have a lot to learn about my culture. So when I moved to Fallon in 2015, I knew nothing. And so I'm still learning. There is so much to learn, and from listening to people and their stories, I have a long ways to go. But when I work on my projects, I don't think about being indigenous or whatever. I'm just thinking, you know, this is what I enjoy doing right now, and I just keep looking at it. And I got insulted one day because this lady asked me if I had a tribal ID card. I mean, who asked that question? I didn't ask her for a driver's license. But, you know, I kind of felt insulted that somebody could actually ask me. I mean, don't you know I'm brown? I mean, you know, I'm Native. But, yeah, I don't know. I have so much to learn yet, and I enjoy listening to stories, and I love to hear about how bad my grandfather was. So, he was the bad guy on our reservation at one time, and they had put him in prison, and then they took him out of prison to go kill the sheriff. Yeah, so, and our family says, well, he was so bad, and it's like, well, that's still part of our history. We didn't know him. So anyway, I still enjoy listening to the stories and who my family was. We're not all good, but you know, we try.
I want to hear that story.
We can compare newspaper clippings of our grandpas.
Yeah. Or my dad, he was the bad guy.
Yeah.
This is such an interesting question. I want to approach it two ways. I would say that one, for the young people in the audience, don't ever pay attention to what the art world wants. That you have to, you know, create and find your voice and be true to yourself and figure out the mediums that you love, and you know, you really have to accept criticism and learn how to take criticism, but you also have to push back, because there was a time when my art was not native art, right? And 20 years later, I was innovating, and other people that were picking up cameras were doing something because it was in their heart. And whatever you're doing with art or your traditional practices is between you and creator. So that's, I think, the primary relationship in your art and your spirituality is, you have your relationship with creator, and so that can't be wrong. I like this question because it does bring up a really crazy time where I was like, okay, let's go out and look at what other photographers are doing, white male photographers are doing, that they're making so much money. So this is where it gets I don't think I've ever said this before. So I started going out to all of these galleries, and what the photographers were doing in the art world, I guess, was they were making large format photographs in low numbered editions. And I was looking at these photographs in some gallery in downtown Santa Fe, and they were like an aerial photograph of a bunch of people at Coney Island. And I was like, huh. My content is pretty a lot more serious than this. But there's something about this size of this photograph that is as interesting, maybe more interesting than the content. And so just in that journey, I was like, I'm gonna try and make some big photographs. And so what does it take to make big photographs? It takes, all of these technical skills that I had learned in school. And that's what I started doing, and truly it does very honestly correlate with becoming very well known in the art world, was making those large scale photographs, which if you think about photography in kind of a nerdy technical way, it takes the highest form of craft, which we're all trying to get to our highest form of craft, our best baskets, and I think that there's some part of that wrapped up in that question is you have to continue honing your skills, whatever your medium is. And once you have that really high craft and you're telling a story, it's gonna happen, it's there's no looking at something that's so beautiful with a story behind it, that's when there's kind of a turn in the career, is what I would say.
Thank you. Yeah. It's sometimes, and even I get caught up in this, right? There's a difference between your commitment to craft and your commitment to community, and they're not always related. And I like what Joanne was saying about sometimes you got to make fun of what people expect of you, in terms of your craft isn't your identity. Your craft is your commitment to it, right? And by craft not being your identity, I mean you are an artist who's indigenous. And sometimes you're an indigenous artist. Sometimes those identities are separate.
Sorry, I just want to correct you.
Sure.
Your name is Noelle.
Noelle, sorry.
No, that's good.
Thanks for the correction, Noelle. So, thinking about this concept of because I see this across various mediums where once our communities are in crisis, everyone wants to pay attention to us and fund our work. And then once our crisis is no longer popular, right? People don't care. So in this vein, what are your forms of resistance to center what you want centered at those moments?
I think my form of resistance is just storytelling. Constantly, just over and over again, I'm telling the same story that a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't realize how recent it was that people were forced into boarding schools. A lot of people don't know about tribal termination. A lot of people still don't know about things like water rights and oil. There's a really good podcast I recommend you guys should check out called This Land, and it gives a really good it gives a good idea of how complicated it is with oil companies and governments fighting indigenous laws. This one focuses on the Indian Child Welfare Act, And it's like this weird roundabout way of just trying to subvert tribal sovereignty and power in order to get access to oil. So I totally forgot what I was going to say. No, I totally blanked out. Wait, what are we talking about?
What do you want centered?
Oh yeah, centered. Sorry. It should, or what do I want centered, and how do I define things, right? It's just defiant storytelling. Just saying, you know, this is what happened. It's really messed up. And like, I'm a contemporary person living with you. And like, just like a few people back, like this is how we were treated. And these have ripple effects and leave like these scars that just are multi-generational, right? And just like sometimes even just like existing and being alive and taking care of yourself and being a healthy person and continuing to make art because it's what you enjoy doing is like sometimes all that's important. Like it doesn't have to be like this deep meaning, right? Just sometimes just being here is, I feel like a really big accomplishment.
Well, I think Standing Rock has opened our eyes because there was just so much going on with our people that they were being shot at and hurt just trying to protect the water. And that really left a deep scar inside of me, and it made me really sad that our people had to go through that. And I don't know, I had a hard time trying to work with my art, or my basket, just thinking about that because it was so hurtful.
I do think that Standing Rock was a really poignant moment for contemporary Native issue awareness. And I think at the same time, you know, for us as Native people, Standing Rock is everywhere. Standing Rock is here, I'm sure, with Vegas Paiute, and it's there at Nuwuvi, and I'm sure it's up north. Like, we're fighting these environmental battles. So you have this like moment of Standing Rock, and then you also have, you know, America's going through a great reckoning with, you know, trying to erase us and with trying to erase, you know, African American history. And these stories need to be told. One of the things that I'm really seeing, and I think it's what you're alluding to, is, you know, for the first time in my lifetime, museums are looking at the demographic of their collections, and you know, I don't want to make up statistics, but they're in the 90 percentiles of white male settler colonial artists, right? So you have all this lack of women, and then you have all this lack of communities of color, and then you have like, this is what is defined as American art. So there's been this big push, this great reckoning with museums and institutions to say, okay, we're not going to segregate the Native American historical art into this one section that has no continuity between the turn of the century and 2020, right? So museums are kind of scrambling to say we really need to collect Native American art, Black American art, Latino, Latinx art. And so how do we respond to that? Is that how this question is kind of?
Yes, I'm gonna go pop culture for a minute. Black Panther spoiler alert, right? You've got Killmonger at the museum asking folks, like saying he's gonna take the British Museum's collection, and the museum curator's like, but we got this. And then he asks, did you though?
Yeah.
Right? And so I guess I'm thinking about, there's a lot of things I'm thinking about, but I'm thinking about that moment and how our ancestral stuff we don't have access to. I'm also thinking about this concept of, and some local artists of color do this too, where they poke fun at what a larger audience expects of us, that we do things solely from our community because our community said, because that's all we can do. And so how do you resist that and make fun of it? Because it needs to be made.
I think humor is medicine, you know, for our communities, definitely, and we can sit with that. But if I had to say one thing that stays really important for me and keeps me going is people have very little knowledge of all of our diversity and all of our different tribes. You know, what people do get in Hollywood and the education system is like, it's like less than this much when it comes to like how incredibly diverse and thoughtful and, you know, intricate and all of our communities are. And so it's like, to me, combating the one story narrative of like, we're a monolithic culture with, you know, all Native Americans are the same. I speak for all Native Americans. I don't speak for all Native Americans, you know, so like kind of countering these ideas. And so for me, that's really about telling as many stories, as many different stories as can possibly be, because people from, you know, dominant white culture, they can be anything, right? They can be doctors, they can be, you know, in the trailer park, they could be Trump supporters, they could be, but Native Americans have this like one story, and if we don't fit in there, it's because that's the only like one story that's kind of been perpetuated. So we need thousands of stories to be told. We need a lot of placement in museums with all of our fascinating diversity, and our differing views, even amongst ourselves, I think are really important. I think a lot of us are telling stories about, you know, when it comes to the environment, we're telling a lot of identity stories, like trying to show how diverse we are and how different all of us are as contemporary Native people, whether we're from different tribes and different from within the tribes. I think environmentally, we're wanting to tell stories of environmental racism and eco-apartheid so that people can understand that like Standing Rock is everywhere, you know? I think we're trying to help people understand that Loretta's basket weaving, if her basket weaving is not healthy, then our whole ecosystem has been disrupted, and it's because of climate change. And so we have to take care of Loretta's basket weaving, otherwise there's this like ripple out effect of, you know, environmental destruction, right? And so for us as Native people, like spiral it back down to this basket weaving is the most important to our cultural perpetuation because it's connected to all things. It's connected to the health of our community, the health of the ecosystem, the health of the environment, the health of global, you know, climate change, all of those kinds of things. So I think we're trying to tell those stories. I mean, I think we're all like resisting, and then just us being here is an act of resistance. I guess that's how I would best answer that.
Well, a lot of our willow is being sprayed with poison, so we really can't learn to, a lot of us don't know how to make the string out of the willow because of the poison. And, you know, because we use the old way is to put it in your mouth and to split it 3 ways. But we don't have a lot of that anymore. And so if we go out to collect, like we have to actually look at the leaves to see if they're curled. If they're curled, that means they're poisonous. They have been poisoned. So we have to be really careful where we go to collect our materials anymore. I use a lot of commercial string.
So as a concluding question from my end, what do you wish I asked you about?
Does anybody have any questions out there? Me?
Hi, Loretta, I have a question about just what you were speaking about when you said that the willows are being poisoned. Who is poisoning the willows, or where is this destruction coming from?
Well, it could be the farmers, you know, they're out there trying to clean their ditches and stuff like that. And even where we go to collect, we go to Fort Churchill, they have allowed us to go in there to collect in certain areas, and they've poisoned a lot of their willows in there too. So poison and a mountain lion, I kind of have to be careful. Because they have a mountain lion out there hanging around, so. But yeah, it's just the different farmers or whatever.
Loretta, I like how you said under your breath, like sometimes I use string. So like, I mean, you know, indigenous people are going to continue existing even if like all the willow get poisoned and we can't use them anymore. So you'll find ways to adapt, right? With like more contemporary materials. And
Don't ask me that one. You don't want to ask me that one. I found these long barbecue skewers at Walmart one day.
Did they work?
Yeah, I made the backboard for a cradle board.
Oh, I know.
They're like that long, right? Yeah. I've tried that. I've gone to Hobby Lobby. They had some red gold there too. So, but just playing around.
No, I love that. I have like this cradle board from back when I was a baby, and it's all like dried and broken, and I'm like, I can't get any willow out here. And so I've been trying to think of like what I can do to fix it, or even if I can fix it, or if I could just like make a new cradle board to be art, like what would I make it out of? Like if I can just buy like metal pieces instead of willow. I don't know, like what are you know, some fun like pipe cleaners? I don't know. Like I like that idea though, like of it being like silly and like cheap, but like still like referencing like traditional methods or traditional form. I don't know. Anyways, I'm just rambling. I have no question.
So yeah, I'm open to opening it to the audience to see if the audience has any questions.
I have a question. When we talk about, you know, walking the line and making fun of ourselves, I know that there's, because the public is so ignorant and has been so institutionalized on what they think is American Indian, Native American Indigenous. When you make fun of yourself, when we make fun of ourselves, because one of my friends, James Luna, he used to do these installations, and the first one that he did for us when I was at the University of California, Riverside, we put on a symposium similar to this. He came out and put himself in a display booth, and he had all of these little markers of, you know, this is where I fell when I went to the store, just like a regular insect exhibit. And it was really kind of funny because he had this other piece where he had stapled some of his artwork just onto the wall, a piece of wood onto the wall. And I watched people walk up and they would say, "Oh, this Indian is so poor. You know, he can't afford to put frames, he can't do this, he can't do that." But he was really making fun of the fact that he was an artist whose value of his work is not always the one that's framed, and it's not always the one that is going to be an exhibit, but it's still art. So when you guys think about that, do you ever think about the fear that people are walking away with? This is real. This is not fun. You know, they don't understand the humor because they don't have our perspective, and they don't have the base knowledge that that this is meant to be a comedy, or this is meant to have humor. So I guess my question is, when you do that, Noelle, do you think about that sometimes? Is that a part of the thought process?
I don't know if I'm worried about misinformation with it, because like, so say for example, like one of the pieces I have in the show is a gun, right? Obviously not like a traditional indigenous tool. It's made with bead weaving, probably from beads that came from like China or something, right? And even though bead weaving isn't traditional, it's evolved into this contemporary art form used by many indigenous communities throughout the world. So at one time, while it's not authentic, it still kind of is at the same time, which I like to think about as myself too. Like, I mean, I'm kind of a miserable Indian. Like, I'm enrolled, I have a card, right, legally, right? But then, like, I don't know how to make a basket. Like, I know, like, you know, a handful of words. You know, I don't know, like, all of my creation stories and stuff like that. But, like, it's funny because at the same time, I'm undeniably Native American, right? So the artwork that I make, it may be wrong, it may be funky or messy, it may have problems, but it is undeniably Native American no matter what. And the story that I put within it is undeniably mine, and that story is created based on history and how my family was treated by the US government. So, like, even if someone does want to look at it and get upset that, like, maybe it's misinforming people, it's my truth, right? And if someone looks at it and they go, oh, that's beautiful, and maybe they think about, like, Indians and guns, there's that other layer, right? Like, I thought this through, like, guns have a relationships with Indians, and we think about cowboys and Indians, right? They may not get deep to the layers of what it means to me. They may not get deep to the layers of, like, why this is kind of a funny object that's, like, made with kind of Indian methods, but kind of not Indian methods, right? But they got a piece of it, and I'm happy that they got at least that one piece of it. And if they're more knowledgeable and they're able to read into it that deep, that's amazing. But I try to make pieces that there's just, like, so many different points of access that someone's going to get something valuable, I think. That's my hope.
I'll pass on that question.
I think it's a really good question. I have all kinds of thoughts, so I'll just go for it. I think for me, I had to figure out who my audience is. And for me, it's you, it's Isla, it's, you know, it's other Native people is my primary audience. And then I think that helps me stay true to, like, humor and going too far. And then, of course, we have, like, you know, a lot of cultural sensitivity and a lot of strict cultural protocols. So I take all of that into my heart, whatever I make, so that I don't go too far. You know, it kind of came up last night, we were talking about it a little bit. I think I've been able to, like, really walk that line in my life. I also, you know, I think when we are using humor, at least when I'm using it, it's kind of like, it comes from such a painful place that maybe it's like satire, and I don't think it's making fun of ourselves as much as it's like trying to shape the dominant viewer, or, you know, the people from the outside of our communities, and say, this is who we are, not what you think we are, you know? And so if I'm being true to you and what I'm making, you're gonna be able to see, I think any Native person can look at other Native people's art, or maybe photography specifically, and say, that was done by a Native, that was done by a non-Native, that was done by a Native would never do that, you know? Like, there's a few that kind of sit on the fringe, but I think that that's one part of the question. So my audience is other Native people, and my hope is that everybody benefits by that. I will say I'm half white too, so I grew up with my mom's side of the family, and I feel like I have this really deep understanding of what white people don't know about the Native side. Like, you know, there's times when I have, like, knockdown, drag out arguments with my white side of the family. It's exhausting, you know? And so I think that I have to be I always try and be really honest about that, because I feel like somehow it gives me a really deep insight into what the outside societies don't know. And so maybe at the end of the day, the art that I make can speak to both, right? And a really, like, in a way that only I could do because I sit on the outside, like in this weird space in between. So.
I asked that same question of Korea to Gisela, when they were putting together who stole the TV. And I was like, at that time I was still at UC Riverside, and one of the things that, one of the photos that she had in there was Nellie rides too far, and it was the lady girl on the bike. she talked about the broader story of that, and who the audience was, and different tribes could look at it, different Native people could look at it, and they had their own story that was, and their own narrative that was being created through that one photograph. So, thank you for that answer. Thank you.
I think I also need to think about who will accept my work. I just do it. You know, I'm not worried about, well, if you like it or you like it. It's like, well, as long as I like it. I think that's what's so important. So I don't think about if it's not Indian enough or whatever. It is, because I made it. You know?
Is it on? It's on. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments they'd like to bring up?
Hello, thank you all for presenting. I'm really been enjoying this. I just was wondering maybe if there are any stories you could just tell about when you were making your art, or just something that comes to mind, either funny or fun, or just something that you'd like to share about a time when you were making art.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I remember. So I was making these moccasins, and instead of making like traditional moccasins, I was making them with like Reeboks for my dad, because he liked to wear Reeboks. And well, I didn't get brain tan skin because I don't know how to tan with brains. And so I just got like some commercial buckskin, and it was, you know, that weird bright yellow color. And I was like tracing out my pattern, and I found a wart on it. And I showed it to my mom, and I'm like, Mom, what is this? And she's like, that's a wart. You know, deers get warts too. And I'm like, yeah, I guess they do. And I just thought it was like the weirdest moment. Where like, I went through this like really industrialized process of getting this like mass-made hide, and it still like had that like imperfection from nature. And it's great. I love finding warts on hides.
I think what I wanted to say to any young people is we live in this age of social media, and we, you know, have these beautiful objects on exhibits. But I would really, if I was more ambitious with social media, I would start a failure category. And I think it's really important, you know, even though I've been doing this a long time, like I have really painful moments of failure where I go all in on a project and it doesn't turn out, I guess, usable, or I'm not happy with it, and I think, you know, it's probably in us from a really early age, like, you know, we're the ones that rip apart the ribbon skirt and start over, and, you know, so there's like this strive for perfection as artists, but there's also like some really painful failures that I think, especially in the social media age, we don't talk about. And so I think it's really important to know that I fail a lot, not a lot, but, you know, like once every couple of years, I, you know, really fall on my face and I have to start all over, and maybe I've, you know, wasted money or wasted people's times, and like I internalize all of that, really painful. But I think you have to press on, you know, because it's really about the body of work, and you have to like even make some bad art to get to the really good art, you know. And so I think that that's something that we don't talk about enough. Like, what are your most painful moments as an artist where you failed, you know? And what does that look like when you're, you know, 20 years old in school? And what does that look like when, you know, you're 35 and 40 and 50? Like, you have to keep going, you know? So that's what I wanted to.
Or until you're 76.
Yeah.
I like that you're talking about failure. Like, if you're working with like weaving or bead weaving, it just like sucks so bad when you fail. Like, I remember when I had my daughter, I wanted to make some things that said something about motherhood, And I thought it'd be this really great idea if I beaded, what's it called, a nursing pad. You know, so when you have babies, you lactate and like milk comes out whether you're feeding or not, right? So they have these like weird little maxi pad things you put in your bra, so your shirt doesn't get wet. So I thought, oh, it's going to be a great idea if I bead these, and I spent tons of hours beading these really beautiful breast pads. And then when I look at them, you can't tell it's a breast pad anymore. And I showed a friend, and they go, "Is that a yarmulke?" So like, you know, I have this like weird breast pad yarmulke thing, and nothing's ever going to come with it. But you know, you get a good laugh.
There's those strippers.
I'll be the photographer.
Any other questions? In the back?
And I guess I have more of a statement. I want to share my gratitude. Your stories are just so amazing. And as a Native person, I'm so thankful that you were vulnerable and courageous and you let us into your world. I think if anything we learned today is that there's no one way to be Native. There's no one way to be Indigenous. And I too feel that interesting humor. I think Native humor is a survival technique. It's a way that we're able to get through all the darkness. And if you think about your art in irony or satire, in a way, the federal government's attempt to wipe us out, I mean, it led to your amazing, again, just glorious stories. So thank you all so much for what you do.
Thank you, Stacy. I think you should have introduced yourself.
I'm Stacy.
She's more than that. She's an Indian Christian.
If there are no more questions, I want to extend the gratitude Stacy said. Thanks for sharing your story and your work with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabad, and to the artists that are on the panel today. Just amazing, amazing. I love that we're able to have these voices here, and it's just, I'm in awe, just soaking up all of this brilliance, and we have more to come. So right now, we're going to be taking a break. The next panel discussion is going to be at 2, I believe. Wait, let me check. 1:30. At 1:30, we're going to reconvene back here. In the meantime, the Donna Beam Gallery is open. So those of you who are able to, stroll over to the Donna Beam Gallery, there will be a number of us walking that way. But also get some lunch. The Student Union has some food places. There's places across the street as well. So please take the time to grab a bite. Also want to note that the Native American Alumni Club is hosting a reception at the TAM Alumni Building, which is really close to the Donna Beam Gallery. So please, join the Native American Alumni Club. They've hosted such a beautiful event for all of you to join us today. And we're going to have more announcements throughout the day. But I think that's good for now. And thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, one big glaring announcement as I look at this book right here. So Cara Romero, this fabulous artist, actually did the cover for one of our own UNLV professors, Dr. William Bauer. Actually, Dr. Bauer, would you stand up, please? So Dr. Bauer, who wrote this book, We Are the Land, A History of Native California, that showcases Cara Romero's work on the cover. It was also written in conjunction with Damon Atkins. But he's more than, this book. He's been a pillar in this community and has done so much for our Native students, so much for our Native community that no one will probably see or notice. But our Native population for our students here is very small. We're less than 0.01%, and our faculty also mimics that percentage in faculty. You know, there's only a couple of us in the American Indian Alliance for Native faculty. Numbers we're hoping to change because we want to build our student visibility here. We want to build more faculty of color and more Indigenous faculty. There shouldn't only be 4. There should be much more. And we're hoping even with this exhibition and with this symposium that people, Native students, see themselves and want to come here, want to be here. We want to show an audience that, you know, Indigenous perspectives matter and our Indigenous histories matter. And so please, you know, buy this book and support our Native Studies program because we do have a minor in Indigenous Studies now here at UNLV. Thank you.